The BMAT is a 2-hour critical thinking test, and it assesses a lot of different parts of your knowledge. This test is really important because for around 7 universities, it is a big barrier as to whether you get into the interview stage or not. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about what a good BMAT score is, and it's a complicated question. I'm going to break it down a little bit more into how exactly the BMAT scored, what it means in terms of the actual numbers, and how that reflects on the universities you're applying to. So if that sounds like a good idea to you, let's get straight into the video. Alright, so I'm a 4th year medical student, and I did my BMAT about 5 years ago now, so I know how hard the BMAT is and how nervous it can be getting your results. Believe me, it was not a great day, just generally waiting for my results. I got, I'll tell you now, a 5.9 on my section 2 and a 5.1 on my section 1. In hindsight, those are pretty good scores, but I think on the day I kind of wanted a 6, so a little bit disappointing, but hey, it got me into Imperial. I've been going 4 years strong here, and that really is the most important thing. But let's talk a little bit about you guys. So the BMAT is a 3-section exam. Section 1 is problem solving critical skills, section 2 is your science, and section 3 is the essay. Now, sections 1 and 2 are both scored from 1.0 to 9.0 on each section. Now, how the scores work are they're not as simple as a normal exam, so you don't get 1 mark for each question. It's sort of a scale where around 0.3 is allocated to 1 question, and then you go from 1.0 to 9.0. Now, it's important to remember that there is no sort of cutoff here. There's no pass mark, fail mark. You just get a number, and that's for sections 1 and section 2. Now, section 3 is scored from 0.0 to 5.0, and that is for the quality of the essay that you produce, so how good it is to read. And then you've got an additional mark, which is sort of A to E, and that's your grammar. And your grammar basically tells you how well the essay flows. Sort of think of it like your SPAG marks that you'd had in GCSEs, so spelling, punctuation, and grammar. That's generally how it's marked, and that doesn't change year on year. But the key to understanding the BMAT is to remember that you're not marked on how well you objectively do on the exam. It's more comparison on how you do compared to the rest of the year. So most of the year group will end up on around a 4.5. That's generally the average, and that was the average for 2022. And for section 3, the average was around a 3. So that's the average, and that's generally where most people will fall into. Now, the remaining sort of higher and lower marks are allocated based on how many standard deviations you fall away from the mean, so how well you do in comparison to the average, basically. That's pretty difficult to understand, but it makes more sense if you think about it like this test is essentially ranking everyone in the year, which is pretty scary, but it's sort of just telling the universities how you as a candidate have performed to perhaps some of the other candidates who they're interviewing. So that's what you need to understand, and it's not an objective marker of how you've done on the exam, whereas your GCSEs and A-levels are obviously more objective. Now, as a result, there are a lot of factors that can affect your score. Things like how many people are taking the exam that year, how hard the exam is, things like how prepared your year group is. So a lot of factors are going into this, but it's also not exactly the score that you get that matters, but it matters what universities you're applying to. So let's talk about that. Now, there are around 7 universities that use the BMAT currently, and actually the BMAT is being phased out. So in 2025, the BMAT won't be an exam anymore, because so little universities use it and so much manpower is required to deliver it. It just doesn't make much sense for them to keep going with it. So I don't actually know what they're going to do as an alternative to the BMAT, but it could stand that they switch to the UCAT and all universities take the UCAT, which I think is a much better idea. Or they could run their own admissions exams, which I think would be far more complicated for candidates to do, but that's really up to them. Now, the universities use a BMAT in vastly different ways. So for example, there's kind of a spectrum where some universities use the BMAT minimally, and a lot of universities use BMAT quite heavily. Now, Imperial, where I go to, kind of fall in the middle. So if you didn't watch the video I did with the Imperial admissions team, you might want to, I'll leave it on the screen somewhere. But that was really good. So I spoke to the admissions team, and from that video, and that was done about a year or 2 ago, they basically said that a 5.5 is exactly what Imperial looked for. So your 2 scores average should come to about 5.5, which is what I got as well. And that's really what Imperial looked for. Now in section 3, it's slightly less important, but you should be aiming for a 3, 3.5. That's kind of the Goldilocks area for Imperial candidates. And that's not a particularly hard score to get. It's kind of average, and that's really what Imperial want. They're not looking for anything above expectations, because they don't really value the BMAT that much. Whereas Oxbridge really do value the BMAT a lot. And if you do research on Oxford and Cambridge, you'll realise that you pretty much need minimum a 6 on both Section 1 and Section 2 to get in with a chance of getting a successful application to Cambridge or Oxford. So they really do like the BMAT and they use it heavily. If you apply to Oxbridge, really put some work into the BMAT and you kind of do need a good score, especially in Section 3. They also look for sort of 4s, 3.5s really to get into Cambridge and Oxford. But it's not just them, Brighton and Sussex also really value the BMAT. They kind of want higher scorers to apply. That's just how they run. And most of the other universities who use the BMAT, like UCL, etc., they aren't valuing it as much and they're sort of more aligned with Imperial. So that just gives you an idea, and the key thing I want you to take away from this is to really only read into your score what your university requires. So don't worry about what your friends have got, because if they've applied to Oxford and you've applied to Imperial, you don't need the same grades that they need. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense, because I can understand it's really nervous getting your BMAT results, and believe me, you're not alone in this. Everyone who's got into medical school was once in your position. I fall into that category as well, and I can tell you it is nervous, but it'll be over. If you want to read the averages, you can. Sometimes that helps you on exam day. Sometimes that helps on results day. What they do is sometimes they upload the averages sort of the morning of the results, so you can go in the BMAT official website, get that little sort of line graph or bar chart that they release, and have a look at where you fall into that. I spent the next week analysing that graph. I know you will. Don't worry, it's a normal part of the process. But yeah, it's really sort of to tell you guys to not worry too much about the BMAT, you know? It's one part of the admissions process. Yes, it is pretty important to some universities, but hey, the interviews are ultimately what make or break your application. So you've still got a massive thing to get through in the interviews, and now the BMAT's done, put all your effort into the interview. Do not waste time worrying about the BMAT. Just practice into that interview, so when you get into that room, you can deliver the best performance possible. But we'll talk about the MMIs later in another video. Hopefully it's been useful to you, and if you'd like more videos on the medical admissions process, let me know. Comment section down below is where you guys can type responses. Instagram as well, you can DM me. Apart from that, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in the next video.